okay. I want to welcome everybody. Summertime is starting outside, so be careful with the heat. We've been doing the book of Esther, so we're about halfway through that book. And what I've been trying to show is this idea that the third section of the Bible, which we call Ketuvim, is where they put all of the repressed stuff from the first two parts. That is to say, here's where all the subversive voices went. Here's where all the rebellious voices went. Here's where all the skeptical voices went. And I think that has several implications. One implication is that the biblical tradition, biblical Judaism, and I would say Judaism in general, is not afraid of rebellious voices. It's not afraid of subversion. There's no category of sedition in the Jewish tradition. I guess there's sedition if you do something contrary to the needs of the community. If you threaten the well-being of the community, that's one thing. But in terms of theology, in terms of taking ideas that are fundamental ideas and objecting to them in some fashion, and questioning them, interrogating them, showing their contradictions and paradoxes, that's never been a problem for this community. And the reason is, first of all, because there is this open-mindedness. And second, because, and with open-mindedness, by the way, there's a sort of cognitive humility. The idea that when you're dealing with God, you're dealing with something beyond comprehension. And so there's really, there's no one can say, I own the truth. We don't have a pope. I hope you knew that, right? We don't have a guy who lives in Jerusalem or Rome or someplace else with a red yarmulke who says, what I say is inerrant. What I say is the truth. Right. First of all, my wife used to joke about this, that it's a good thing the Pope is celibate, because if he had a wife, can you imagine what guy could consider himself inerrant if he had a wife? You know, hey, Mr. Inerrant, you left your car keys. You know, hey, Mr. Inerrant, you're late for your appointment. You know, I mean, all of us who are literally, I mean, I shouldn't joke, but all of us who are in relationships, you know, understand that in a relationship you learn a certain degree of cognitive humility. Okay. It's only when you elevate somebody outside the world of relationships that you can have such a claim. But it's a rather, I mean, from a Jewish standpoint, I mean, with due respect, and I do have great respect for the church, it's a kind of outrageous claim, because how somebody can say everything I say is true, and there's no possibility of my making a mistake. You know, no rabbi would ever say such a thing. It's you know, there are arrogant rabbis, I'm told, but no rabbi would ever have that kind of chutzpah. And the other thing that's amazing is that you have a community which has sufficient solidarity to embrace rebellious voices, skeptical voices, subversive voices, because what unites us in Jewish community is not ideology, it's not philosophy. We have multiple philosophies and multiple ideologies and multiple ways of looking at the world. Even within the Bible itself, we have multiple ways of looking at the world. But because what unites us is a deep sense of family, of ethnic connection, of social connection. And for that reason, there's room for conversation within the family. Now, sometimes you get things on the edge of those conversations. So there have been times in Jewish history when people who presented subversive voices were excluded from the community because they were felt to threaten the life of the community, not its ideological well-being, but its actual life, right? The Christian community checked out. We didn't push them out, they checked out. The Sabbatean community of the 17th century, it was a danger to the community. It was a danger to have this guy running around saying he was the King Messiah, because that made the political stability of Jewish communities threatened. The fact that he was claiming to be a political power is what made it so difficult. And today, I think that you could see that. Today, you can see that. You know, we have a big argument about Middle East politics. You know, so if a person were to stand up in synagogue and claim, I support BDS, I supported the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, I think most congregations would have a hard time with that person. Again, not because they're voicing an idea that we object to, but because they threaten the well-being of the community, because they threaten the well-being of Israel. Within Israel, there is a wide political spectrum, by the way. I don't know if you read Haaretz, which is the sort of left-wing Israeli newspaper. It's the leading it's intellectual newspaper of Israel. It's not the most popular because it's written in a language that you have to have a dictionary to follow in Hebrew. It's now available in English. But Haaretz contains opinions which are way outside of what we even in America would consider normal politics for Israel and Palestine and other kind of issues, because the community has the power, has a power of solidarity to allow for all these kinds of outside voices. Okay, that doesn't mean that individual Jews are going to like each other, and it doesn't mean that there are going to be people in the shul you don't like, and it doesn't mean there's be opinions you don't want to hear when you come to shul. But as a tradition, we welcome all kinds of opinions. We welcome all kinds of all kinds of subversive ideas. So when we open the third section of the Hebrew Bible, Ketuvim, that's where all the subversive ideas are. And we saw that together when we look at the book of Job, because the book of Job is a direct attack on the central theological idea of the book of Genesis and the book of Exodus, and particularly the book of Deuteronomy. Here you have a righteous man who is innocent, who is suffering, and God is responsible for it. And so the whole notion of a God who rewards virtue and punishes sin is called into question by the book of Job. The whole notion of that is attacked by the book of Job, and attacked very openly. And it's in the Bible. It's not like shoved off to the side. And now we get to the book of Esther. And I suggested to you that the book of Esther is also a very radical book, except it does something very clever. Something much more clever than Job. It cloaks the subversive ideas it offers in a funny book, in a slapstick, weird, wild, crazy, funny book. Now, when you do that, that makes that what you're doing then is you're in some ways defending yourself. You're protecting yourself, because if anybody says, this is pretty radical stuff, yeah, it's just funny. What do you want? It's not just funny. It's a very interesting way of getting an idea across that people might have a hard time hearing otherwise. It's a very, very sophisticated and interesting way of doing it. So let me stop for a moment. Any questions about this? Just to sort of summarize where we are, and then we'll jump into the book in a minute. Yes, Douglas, welcome back. How was Hawaii?
There's no bad Hawaii. It was interesting to walk on the beach path and required to be masked outdoors the same day that the president said you didn't need to be masked outdoors. But whatever you're going to do. My question for you, you said that it allows the subversive voices. What was so subversive about Spinoza that he got excommunicated?
That's a very good question, and there's a couple of really good books about this. The excommunication of Spinoza was actually a move by his sister to steal the family inheritance. Okay, that's really what it was. So, hang on just 1 second. I'm taking care of an emergency here, and I just want to see if I can get a message back. So the story of it. The story of Spinoza's excommunication is a very interesting story. The ideas that he offered were subversive. They were really subversive, but they weren't as subversive as some ideas that other people were offering. And they didn't get excommunicated. Ibn Ezra, for example, was one of the great Bible commentators, Spanish Jew who was wandering Europe, lived in England for a while, lived in Holland for a while. Ibn Ezra, in his commentaries, wrote things that were just as crazy as what are outside the boundaries of normal belief that Spinoza wrote. But the thing that made Spinoza so difficult partly was his sister's pressure on the community to excommunicate him so she could steal the family inheritance. Jewish families haven't changed, guys, right? And partly it was the politics of Spain and Holland. The concern had to do a lot with the community that was accepting Moranos and Conversos coming in from Spain, and how they could be protected. And some of Spinoza's ideas sort of threatened their well-being, because the question was, what do you ask those people to attest to when they come in? So it's a complicated thing. It wasn't so straightforward. And in other generations and in other communities, a guy saying what he was saying would not have been excommunicated. Okay.
You have a book to recommend to read?
Yeah, I think a guy's name is Nadler. I'll look for it up. He's at University of Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin Madison. He wrote a wonderful biography of it. I'll look it up for you. And anyway, but even excommunication, excommunication doesn't. I mean, it's a strange thing. I mean, he was excommunicated. Yeah, Stephen Nadler, Nadler. Stephen Nadler. He's on Amazon. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Wisconsin. I met him at a conference. He was a lovely, lovely guy. I didn't meet Spinoza. I met Nadler. I would have liked to meet Spinoza, but he didn't talk to me. In every generation, somebody gets excommunicated. Mordechai Kaplan got excommunicated. Right. And by the way, and the excommunication of Mordechai Kaplan was the reason that Harold Schulweis ended up at JTS, because he graduated from Yeshiva College and he read an article in the New York Times that a bunch of these rabbis had excommunicated Kaplan. And he said, anybody that could piss off rabbis like that is someone I want to go meet. And that's how he became Kaplan's student. So I had this idea as a retirement present for Rabbi Schulweis. I was going to try to get him excommunicated. And I tried my damnedest. I mean, I called all kinds of Orthodox rabbis and said, do you know what this guy is teaching? And everybody said, yeah, but he's a wonderful Jew. I mean, what am I supposed to? No one wanted to excommunicate him. And I had to call Harold and confess to him that I'd failed. But I thought it would make a wonderful retirement present, a certificate of excommunication signed by 200 Orthodox rabbis. The irony of Mordechai Kaplan's excommunication is that he was excommunicated by the group of rabbis that brought his father to America from Lithuania. His father was a kosher inspector. His father was a rabbi, and his father was a kosher inspector. And early in the 20th century, this group of Orthodox rabbis was trying to corner the market on kosher food in Manhattan and in New York, in the 5 boroughs of New York. So they brought in all these kosher inspectors, and one of them was Mordechai Kaplan's father. And then a generation later, the children of those rabbis excommunicated the children of that rabbi. That's one of the ironies of the excommunication of Mordechai Kaplan. All right. Yes, Stanley, go ahead. We haven't even started Bible yet. I just want to point this out. Go ahead.
Didn't Mordechai Kaplan go back to Lithuania after JTS and get a shmita from a rabbi there?
Probably.
What?
Kaplan was a very learned, very brilliant guy. I heard him speak when he's also lived a long time. By the way, Reconstructionists really live a long time. Kaplan lived to be about 103. Schulweis was 89. I mean, tell the world you don't believe in a personal God, you live forever. It's unbelievable. I heard Kaplan give a speech when I was a student at the Hebrew University. He was 84 at the time. And he stood in a lounge in one of the dorms, and there were about 100 of us sitting on the floor. And he gave a remarkable lecture. And there were these yeshiva guys that had come to challenge him. And he was completely unafraid of them. Because every time they would say, what about this? And they'd start a verse or a section from Talmud, he could finish it by heart. Because he knew all this stuff. He just knew it all. Very interesting soul. All right, let's take a look inside. So any other questions before we go on? How we got on to Kaplan? Oh, subversive voices, that's how. Okay, ready? So here's the book of Esther. Let's go through just to recap. So the first chapter sets the scene with the banquet and the banishing of Vashti. The second chapter introduces the search for a new wife and the crowning of Esther, right? And then the third chapter we introduce Haman, boo, and talk about his anti-Semitism and the decree that all of the Jews of Persia would be destroyed on the 13th of Adar. It's about a year before that. And then we have in the fourth chapter, Mordechai's response. And as I pointed out to you, his first response traditional response. If a catastrophe is coming to the community, it must mean that God is angry with us. God is angry with us because we sinned. So the way that you undo the catastrophe is by undoing the sin. You repent. And so you put on sackcloth and ashes and you pray and you fast. But it doesn't work. And that's one of the radical things about the book of Esther. The normal channels, as it were, of Jewish history, of responding to Jewish history, don't work. So what happens is he goes to Esther. Having sort of struck out with God, he now has to find somebody who can undo this. And he goes to Esther, and now comes what I think is the most interesting sort of moment in the book, because she's been queen now for 9 years. She's been living in the palace, living the life of the queen of Persia. Now, remember at the beginning, we pointed out that the names Mordechai and Esther are deeply assimilated names. They're the names of the gods of the Babylonians who conquered our temple, conquered Jerusalem. But by this time, Jews had two names. You have an inside name. Her name is Hadassah, and an outside name. Okay? You have I have a Hebrew name and an English name. But you have two identities. You have an inside identity, your Jewish, your family identity, and an outside identity, the identity that you present to the world, the face you present to the world. But after 9 years in the palace, the question is, who is Esther? How much of Esther is left, right? How much of her is the person she intends to be? And who does she intend to be? And this, I think, is a remarkable metaphor for diaspora Jewry. We who live outside the land of Israel, we who speak English, we who dress Western, we who are engaged in the life of the culture in which we live, and Jewish life is in addition to the culture in which we live. The question is, how do you mediate between two different identities? How do you mediate between the two cultures that you live in? Who are you? And how do you live that life? And how much of you is Jewish and how much of you is Persian, or in our case, American? And where do the two meet, and where do they overlap, and where don't they overlap? And the question of identity is really one of the questions of this book. Who are you? Who are you really? Right? And remember, the first question of the Bible is God's question to Adam. Ayeka, where are you? Where are you in your identity? So what happens is, let's go to chapter 4, right? So he comes to the palace. Mordechai is wearing his sackcloth and ashes, his grieving costume, his mourning clothes, mourning, clothes of grief, clothes of mourning, because he's praying for the welfare of the community, and he comes to the palace. Now, what you're going to get a sense is there is a wall separating the palace from the town, from the capital, from Shushan, from the country. And the palace is a happy place. Remember, Shushan, if you spell it out in Hebrew letters, is Sin, Sin, Vav, Nun, which means Sason, happiness. It's like Disneyland, right? When Walt built Disneyland, I know this because I learned these things, the first thing they did was they created this giant hill, it's called a berm, all around Disneyland. So except if you're on top of one of the rides way up on high, you can't see out. If you walk around Disneyland, you can only see Disneyland. You can't see Anaheim. Now think about that, because you're supposed to be enjoying your time in Disneyland. And Disneyland, interestingly, like Las Vegas, doesn't have a lot of clocks. Doesn't have a lot of clocks, right? It's hard to tell what time it is in Disneyland. Right? You walk around, you have time. The sun goes down. It's time for the parade. I mean, you're on Disney time. You're in Disneyland. You're far away from the world of tsaris. You're far away from the problems and the issues of the world outside. Well, the palace of Shushan is the same way. And the symbol of that is that you're not allowed to enter the palace in mourning clothes, because that would ruin the mood. Because that would ruin the joy, right? So Mordechai comes to the palace, wearing palace gate, wearing sackcloth, right? When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. Now, why is she agitated? Well, let's think if we can peel this back and see why she's agitated, right? Well, you could say that she realizes something's terribly wrong. I mean, her uncle's wearing the clothing of a mourner. It must mean that somebody in the family has died. It could be that she realizes from the way they've described him, your uncle's at the gate and he's wearing these funny clothes. It could be that she's concerned, that maybe something terrible is happening and that's why he's coming. And that's why he's dressed this way. That would be a positive way of reading it. I want to suggest something slightly different because if you look at the next line, I think it sort of gives it away. He comes to the palace gate in sackcloth. She's agitated, but we don't know why she's agitated. But look what she does. She sent clothing for Mordechai to wear so he might take off the sackcloth, but he refused. So now, wait a minute. Her response to his grief is what? Well, it's Hollywood. It's a makeover, right? Give him a new suit. He'll feel better. The answer to all of your problems in Hollywood is a makeover, right? Why is she agitated? Because she likes being the queen. She likes, and remember, she was told by him, don't tell anybody who you are. So people might know that she's his uncle, but they don't know exactly what the connection is. And if they see him, so they come to the palace and they say, your crazy uncle is at the gate raving and ranting in these funny clothes. What she wants him to do is shut up. Don't threaten my gig. Don't threaten my position in the palace. All of us have a crazy uncle. Do you all have any crazy uncle? All of us, and you don't want your crazy uncle coming to like your office. I mean, you don't want him coming to places where you want people to think well of you, right? It's one thing if your crazy uncle comes to the Seder, but it's another thing if your crazy uncle shows up in your office, It's like, oh my God, like, shut up, get out of here. So the crazy uncle is at the gate. So she sends him clothes like, dress up respectable. What the hell is wrong with you? But now notice, she can't talk to him directly. You can't get a message back and forth. You can only send messages through the eunuchs and the servants. Now, whenever you send messages through another person, it's going to get a little messed up, right? And there's a delay. It's not like texting, it's like there's a delay. So Esther summoned Hathach, one of the eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordechai to learn the why and the wherefore. I mean, he refused to accept the clothes, so obviously something is wrong. Go find out from my uncle Mordechai what's going on. So Hathach went to Mordechai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordechai told him all that had happened to him and about the money that Haman had offered to pay to the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. And he gave him the written text of the law, which had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. And he asked him to show it to Esther and inform her and charge her to go to the king and appeal to him and plead with him for her people. So what has Hathach got to do? He's got to talk about what happened, what Haman's decree was, and ask her to now take responsibility. Now, wait a minute. Mordechai told her when she went into the palace, don't tell him you're Jewish. So what is he telling her now? Tell him you're Jewish. Tell him who you really are. And tell the king that you have an interest beyond the palace. Now think about that politically for a minute. The queen is the embodiment, like the king is. She's the embodiment of the people, the embodiment of the nation, right? In England, it's the crown. I don't know if you watch The Crown, but the crown is the embodiment of the nation, right? That's why the great scandal of Diana was that she obviously had things that were on her mind that weren't the embodiment of the role. You become the role. I mean, why did Harry and Meghan want to leave the palace? Not just because of racial stuff, because he didn't want to play that role. Because once you become the prince or the king, you become the nation. But to show up and say, I have a loyalty outside of my loyalty to the Persian nation, in some ways, that's exactly what Haman charged. This is a people who has a different loyalty. And she's supposed to go and say, I'm loyal to my people, the people I was born into, more than I'm loyal to you, your majesty? How is she supposed to do that? You could see why this is a complicated matter for her. This is a complicated thing for her to do. And it threatens her position in the palace. So what happens when Hatatch goes and tells her this is what she needs to do? Esther told Hatatch to take back to Mordechai the following reply. All the king's courtiers and the people of the king's province know that if any person or man or woman enters the presence of the inner court without having been summoned, there is one law for that person, to be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. So what happens? What did she just say? She doesn't want to go. And she says to him, there's a protocol. And the protocol is I have to be invited in. And for some reason, I haven't been invited for 30 days. Now, if you're the king's consort, you would imagine that they would be sleeping together every night. But for 30 days, they haven't been together. She's been in the harem and he's been in the palace. So she realizes, maybe I've lost the king's favor. This might not be a good time to show up with a petition from these Jews, right? That's one thing she's saying. And it's dangerous to show up because you don't know how he's going to respond. Look what he did to Vashti. Vashti stood up for herself. Vashti said no. Vashti violated the will of the king. And what happened to her? Out. She's exiled. I don't want to get exiled like Vashti. I don't want to end up like Vashti. But there's one more thing, another way to read it. Let's read it a little deeper. Let's read it a little deeper. And I apologize because it's a little more cynical than the one we learned in Hebrew school. She doesn't want to go because she's not sure she wants to be Jewish anymore. She likes living in the palace. She likes all of the perks of being a queen. She likes the lifestyle. It's been 9 years. She's had nothing to do with Mordechai for 9 years. She now has become a person of the palace. And what language does she speak? She speaks palace talk. She speaks palace talk. And it was a certain kind of gobbledygook to the rest of us. So because when you look now at the dissymmetry between what Mordechai is saying to her and what her answer is, Mordechai says, we're all going to die. We have been condemned to death. There is a genocide coming. And what's her answer? Oh, there's a big rule. You're not allowed to go see the king. If you haven't been summoned, I haven't been summoned, you can't go. Something terrible could happen. I just can't. Like, her response is so trivial and so selfish compared to his warning that you come to realize that either she's been hypnotized into the palace and has become such a palace person and doesn't in any way identify with the fate of her people outside. That's one possibility. Or doesn't want to identify with the people outside. Something has happened to this girl. The Hadassah in her has been squelched. And she is just Queen Esther. And her identity has been warped and corrupted. So Mordechai has a problem. How do you wake up somebody who's been hypnotized? Elise.
Rabbi, do we know the relationship between Mordechai and Esther? Was it a close relationship? Did she come out of nowhere?
Very good question. So the Bible tells us that he is her uncle. Her parents died. He adopted her and raised her as his own child.
Oh.
Okay, that's what the Bible says. Okay. Now, you know enough Jewish law to say, wait a minute. He's a single unmarried man living in a household with a beautiful, let me put the word gently, ripe young woman. Niece, foster father, stepfather. The Talmud already, the Midrashic tradition in the Talmud already says, come on, they were married. She was his niece. She was his foster child. But when she reached adulthood, he married her. Otherwise, why wasn't she married off before Achashverosh got her? She should have been married or at least engaged. In the Bible, young girls are engaged when they reach puberty. So she should have been engaged to somebody or married to somebody. And the reason she wasn't, says the Midrash, is because she and Mordechai were married. And then you're going to say, well, wait a minute. If she's married, how did she end up in the palace with Achashverosh? Right? Because they didn't want to tell anybody that they were married. I mean, so these are the kinds of, so the question you're asking, Elise, is a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. And I don't know you can use your imagination. That's what the Midrash is asking us to do. Okay? But the question is now, all right, Mordechai has to wake her up because she's his only hope. How do you do that? All right, let's get some comments here. David, you're first. David, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, good.
Hi, Ed. The issue that comes to mind as you talk is a very an issue that I can relate to, which is the issue of hiding out, the issue of not the convenience of maybe not being so Jewish within a community that is where there are no Jews or very few Jews. That's what I'm hearing, that strongly from what you're saying. Yes, no, tell me, please.
What? So say it again. The issue is a community where there is a Jewish community, but it's a diaspora Jewish community. So it's a community whose loyalties are split, internal, external.
Well, I'm saying that the issue, there seems to be a lot about hiding out.
It is. And the Hebrew word Esther, the name Esther in Hebrew means to hide, to conceal. Lahastir means to hide yourself, right? So this whole story is exactly that. You live in diaspora, and the Persian community was the first great diaspora community, right? The Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. The Persians conquered the Babylonians. Jews went back to Jerusalem, but those who stayed in Persia. So this is the first great stable diaspora community. And one of the meditations here is, what does it mean to live in diaspora? And one of the means of living in diaspora is you've got to negotiate these identity issues. How much of your inner life do you expose to the outer world?
And it's very modern, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I think it's brilliant. Look, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, it's just shown up throughout history, the little bit of history that I know, and it continues. It's a question that's current.
So 2 Jewish boys in Cleveland in the 20s or 30s are walking to Hebrew school, and they keep getting the crap beat out of them by the Italian and Irish neighborhoods, mobs that they have to walk through to get to Hebrew school. So when they get to Hebrew school, they start making little notes in their machberet, in their notebook, about a guy who is a strange visitor from another planet with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortals, and walks around with a big S on his chest, but he wears the clothes of a mild-mannered, quiet, nebbishy, Daily Planet reporter. And only we, wink, wink, only we, the readers, know who he really is inside. And he has to negotiate his inner identity and his outer identity. And he falls in love with a girl from the earth. I mean, he falls in love with a diaspora, with a one of his, and Lois Lane, and he has to figure out, does he tell her? Does he not tell her? How much of his life does he tell her? Anybody recognize this story?
Yes, of course, Superman. And the thing is, I grew up in such a community where it was, where there were very few of us, very, very few of us. I'm sure there are others.
But even in a community where there's lots of you, you're never the majority. So you're always a minority. I mean, even, Beverlywood has a lot of Jews, but, you step across the street and you're in a whole nother world, right? Okay, let's see. Bert, you're next.
Yeah, one of your comments about there was a large Jewish community in Shushan, but there was no Jewish community, as I understand the story, within the palace walls. So she really was totally divorced from Jewishness other than perhaps some memories that came from when she lived outside the palace walls.
Very good. Right, exactly right.
In Shushan, you can reinforce your Jewishness if you choose to, or if you're forced to. But if you're in the palace walls, there's no reinforcement, and it may simply eke away.
Yes, I think that's exactly, and not just eke away, but the reward for hiding your Jewishness is an endless supply of Chanel number 5, is an open charge account at Tiffany's, is all you can buy at Bloomingdale. I mean, you get all of the perks of the palace as long as you follow Mordechai's law and not tell anybody who you are. So she does, and that's what happens.
And it was easy for her.
Yes. But now he comes and says, I need you to do something for us. And she says, us, Kimosabi? All right, Andy, go ahead.
I'd like to take a different spin on this.
Please, go ahead. Yeah, please.
I'd like to look at it as, instead of looking at it as a person who's hiding their Jewish identity and trying to say we have, the man of the people versus a person who's now in the diaspora, why don't we look at it as just the way that culture has changed? So what happens is, I appreciate that you want to come see me, uncle, but you got to dress the right way. You have to walk a certain way. You have to talk a certain way. And for me to go and just immediately assume a process or take something to the king, there's a protocol. The same way when the spies would go into Egypt or to Israel, they didn't just walk in and just say, hey, look at me. No, they had to take in the looks of the people so they could walk around and explore. So I look at it when I was reading this, when you were reading it, that's how I'm imagining it. I'm imagining she's upset because, he's not getting it. You just can't walk in like this. There's a protocol. We have to follow the protocol so that we are now accepted here. And I think that's where this story kind of takes it, where you see some of the frustration and some of the things where maybe some of the dialogue is not there, where, well, can't you just go and do this? Come on, we have this urgency. Yes, we'll take care of it. I'll take care of it for you, but I can't just pick up and go and do it. There's a protocol for me to follow.
Yeah. I appreciate what you're saying. And I think there is some of that here. I agree with you, but I think she's refusing. And I think this is her oblique way of saying, I'm not going to help you. I think it's her way of deferring, of pushing him off. And she's quoting palace protocol, not in order to get him to follow the rules, but because she just really doesn't want to. And she's afraid to, or she doesn't want to threaten her position. She's afraid of that, or because she's not interested anymore, this Jewish issue we're talking about, or because she's become just so hypnotized into that world. And in that world, so there's this terrible dissymmetry between his urgency, you said that, his urgency, and her quoting of palace protocol. I mean, it's such a strange conversation, right? It's just a strange conversation, right? You ever walked into the hospital emergency room in terrible pain, and the lady at the triage desk says, I need to see your driver's license, your insurance card, and have you fill out this form? And you say, lady, my guts are falling out. You take care of me. Have you ever had that experience? I unfortunately in my life, a number of times I've had kidney stones. And when you walk in with that kind of pain, all you want is a shot of Demerol, and you don't want to fill out a form to get it. But the woman says, you got to fill out this form. What comes out of my mouth at that point is not exactly gracious, so that's one of the ways to read. I think she's quoting protocol in order to push him off.
But I think that using that, that's a great example, because if you look at it, when people are calling like 911 or they're calling for an emergency,
right?
What are they really trying to do? They're also trying to lower it down,
calm you down,
and walk you through the process so they can see it. Or if it's something really drastic, okay, we know what the next step is. Now, again, it's not in the text. It's not there.
No, you're right. No, but that's why the text is fun, because it elicits these kinds of comments. All right, Stanley, you're next.
Would you say that because the story is written the way it is, it lends itself to the kind of caricatures that you or us create in order to make these explanations that we're talking about. With any other story, we would never do that. We would try to look.
No, I think that we're doing Midrash in the same way that we do Midrash on all biblical texts. The truth of the matter is, this is a story which is caricatured. I mean, the story itself is caricatured. So, it's a funny story. It's, I mean, every other chapter you're drunk. So what could be more fun than that? I mean, it is a funny story, and it invites caricature, but this isn't caricature. This is Midrash. I'm trying to figure out, there's a human interaction here between two people in a crisis moment. What are they revealing about themselves in this crisis moment? I think they're revealing a great deal about themselves. All right, David, you're up.
I just want to say that Andy's point is interesting because it brings to mind for me the issue of Muslims who come to the United States now, and are they supposed to dress the way we feel comfortable, or the way they feels is appropriate to them and feels right to them and is part of their tradition? You walk out in the world and you wear a yarmulke. Do you wear it all the time? Do you take it off sometimes? Do you all of these are real issues that all human beings, the whole issue of conformity and what you lose in that conformity and why you're conforming and should you have to conform. That seems to be what Andy's addition to the conversation was bringing up. It's very powerful.
But you see, part of it is the same protocol is what gave you Haman in a genocidal decree. I mean, where's the protocol there? Right? You wouldn't have imagined there had been some policy review before you off a whole population. But you could be right. I mean, there is a great deal of emphasis on protocol in this book, but they're making fun of it in the sense that this protocol hides a great deal of evil. All right, Bert, you get the last comment, then we're going to go back to the text.
I may have the sequence a little incorrectly, but it seems to me that when Mordechai first shows up, Esther doesn't really know what he wants, but her impression is that whatever it is, he better get with the program.
Right.
Then there's an awareness, it seems to me, that begins to dawn on her, and maybe it's her latent Jewishness. Once she finds out that the community is going to be exterminated, she begins to take some action, which I think reflects her, I'll call it latent Jewishness. So I think there's this awareness that begins to grow. And I think that's a very positive message, at least for me.
Okay, good. That's another way to read it. It's beautiful. Let's take a look now at what Mordechai does in response. So his niece is the queen of Persia. The Persian Jews are threatened. He needs her to intervene. She has given him this protocol message. So he has to figure out, how do I get her to see this as urgently as I do? And he makes a speech, and it's a remarkable speech. There's 3 claims that he makes to her. And I'm going to ask you, which of the 3 do you think is the one that does it? You know that he's successful, because we know that. But which is the one that he does? Which one works? When Mordechai was told that what Esther had said, Mordechai had this message delivered, okay? Claim number 1. Do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life, being in the king's palace, okay? You can't pass forever, honey. What happens to us will eventually happen to you. One way or the other, you're going to slip. They're going to find out who you are, okay? 2, on the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. That's a strange claim. It's a very strange argument. If you keep silent, we'll figure out something else to do. We'll figure out some other way to survive. But if you keep silent, what happens to you? Now, you and your father's house. You, I understand. Father's house, she's an orphan. There is no father's house. Except if you understand that what he's saying is that if you turn your back on us today, it'll be the last time you have anything to do with the Jewish people. The people who birthed you and raised you in the world, if you can't protect them at a moment like this, using the powers that you've accumulated, you'll have no relationship with those people ever again. If we get destroyed, you'll have to watch, but we'll never have any connection. This is your last chance to have a connection with the people who raised you, with the people who are your people, because this is going to be your statement that your people are the Persians, not us. And finally, and he says, here's the third comment, and who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Who knows that this is the reason why you're there? Who knows? And who knows is such an interesting phrase, right? Who knows? In other words, he's speculating. It's not a fully formed theology the way it was in the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, when Joseph's brothers come to him and Joseph reveals himself, he says to his brothers, don't blame yourselves. God did this. God sent me here. It wasn't you. God sent me. But Joseph was sure of that. Mordechai, not so sure, but he suggests to her, there's something bigger going on here. Your life, my life, everything we see around us is part of a bigger narrative, part of a bigger story. And this is what gives meaning to life, is to be part of that bigger story. That's why you are where you are. This is the reason why you've become the queen of Persia. These three arguments move her. And she says, okay, go assemble the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Don't eat or drink for 3 days or nights. And I and my maidens will observe the fast. Then I'll go to the king, though it's contrary to the law. And if I perish, I'll perish. I'll give up my life. I'm willing to give up my life to try and save my people. So Mordechai went about the city and did what Esther commanded him, told everybody to fast for 3 days. All right, 3 arguments he makes to her, and he wakes her up radically. He says to her, number one, eventually they'll find out who you are and you will pass. You won't pass. They'll get you too. That's a sort of pragmatic reason, right? Number 2, if you don't do anything, we'll figure something out, but this will be your last connection with the people, with your people. From this day forward, you'll have no relationship with us. And number 3, who knows, this is the reason you're there. There's a larger process, a larger narrative going on. Okay, which one of the 3 arguments convinced her? Douglas. What before you want to just do this? Everybody hold up a finger, 1, 2, or 3. Which argument do you think okay, I see a 3, I see another 3, I see a 1, 3, 3, a 2, 2 2s, 2 2s, 3 3s, and a 1. Okay, good. A 3.
It really,
another 3. Okay, good. Douglas, you're up.
it really depends how you read her character. Because
Yeah.
if you look at the 3 arguments, argument number 1 is fear. Argument number 2 is guilt. And argument number 3 is personal responsibility.
Okay.
And so if you view her as a noble character, and we just celebrated, some of the great thinkers of, Rabbi and Malka Schulweis, personal responsibility is the key element to their theology. And, this is what you want her to do. This is what she's there for.
Right.
If there's a nobility to her, it has to be number 3. I don't like saying that she's doing it out of fear for her own life. And number 2 is just Jewish guilt.
I don't think it's Jewish guilt.
Yeah, it is.
I think it's a recognition of if you don't step up now, you'll never again be part of us. It's not
That's
guilt.
the cyanide capsule that you're
No. This will effectively cut you off from your people. And it's not guilt. It's just a fact. All right, David, you go next.
I just thought that actually listening what Douglas said, that number 2 really contains number 1 and number 3.
Okay.
That's all,
Okay. So number 2 is a more comprehensive one.
Yeah.
Okay. Bert.
Cutting yourself from off from your people forever is a very, and what that means is a very powerful
It
thing.
means you're an orphan in history, not just an orphan in life.
And from your God.
And from God and from everything that's precious, that was once precious to you.
Yeah.
Bert, please.
I know I was in the minority with the only number one.
Okay, it's good. I want to hear all the opinions. I've heard a 3 and a 2.
Psychologically about Esther. She's spent 9 years totally isolated from Jewish thoughts.
Okay.
Okay. And so I have to ask, how come she suddenly has this come to Jesus moment? What is it? Well, sorry, that's the best expression I could come up with.
Fair enough.
So what I mentioned earlier about this awareness thing, I think she thought about, he's right, they're going to get me. Well, what does that also mean? And then you could lead into why number 2 and number 3 made sense for her. But I just don't, being isolated from the Jewish people from whom she's been isolated for 9 years, what's the big deal? She may not even know what that quote means yet until the awareness sinks into her. So I have to reject number 3 totally. Number 2, if she knows Jewish history, and I don't know what the pre-palace background was, Jews are resilient. Okay, and maybe, I have no more connection to my family, whatever that means, dies out. So, yeah, but, number 1, anyway, that's my thinking about her awareness development and why I picked number 1.
Great. Well, whatever it was, she wakes up.
Yeah.
And now she's on his side. And she's going to fast. And now she has to go to the king and see what she can do. But for that, we're going to have to wait till next time. So thank you all very much. It was great to study together. We'll do this next Wednesday, okay? I'm doing College of Jewish Studies tonight at 7 o'clock. We're going to talk about prayer and ritual. And Shabbos, of course, we have Torah study. And it's beautiful outside. So go take a walk. Everybody take good care. Thank you for paying attention.
One day I want to explore this relationship with Mordechai and Esther. That's got some meat there.
It does.